This is Platemark with me, Ann Shafer. I'm an independent curator who focuses on works on paper that includes prints, drawings, photographs, and books. Platemark is a podcast about prints and the printmaking ecosystem. When I say prints, I'm talking about fine art prints, usually limited editions, though not always. We're talking about etchings, woodcuts, lithographs, screen prints, that kind of thing. I'm trying to support the print ecosystem by introducing listeners to people who occupy various roles in the ecosystem. That includes artists, of course, but also includes printers, publishers, gallery people, museum curators, art historians, authors, and today, a conservator. It's a first for Platemark. It's my hope with this series to help people understand a little bit more what all of these people do in these various roles, and also we're going to share with you stories that include and hopefully make more understandable some of the challenging technical parts and bits of printmaking. I find people in this corner of our world to be the nicest people that you'll ever meet, and it is the most charming spot in the art world. I like genuine artists who want to make genuine things, and I want genuine people helping those genuine people make genuine things. And that's why I'm here, and why I'm sharing all of these stories with you, helping you better understand why prints are special and worthy of your attention. The other reason, of course, is that they are a terrific gateway to collecting, because they are always less expensive than singular and unique works of art. My guest today is Alison Luxner. She's a paper conservator at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. She has an interesting story to tell about the journey to get to be a conservator. It's rather involved and requires a whole lot of extra stuff that art historians don't have to go through. They have to have not only the art history, but also they need to know how to make the thing and have made them themselves, but also have the science. The science. We also talk about why you should put those white gloves aside when you're handling works of art. Only in very special circumstances should you use them. And we talk about all sorts of other things as well. All right, housekeeping. I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. There are not a lot of images to be found in this episode. We talk about life instead of specific objects. So I've got a few images of Alison working at the bench, but for the most part, it's just us talking. So I hope you enjoy that. If you do go over to the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com to check out the very few images that we have this week, you'll also find a place to sign up for our newsletter. I'll send you notices of new episodes and also of other things. In addition, I encourage you to go over to Facebook and join our Facebook group. There's a bunch of us over there, and we love to share images and working process and talk about print and all sorts of things. So come on over. The water is fine. All right, I think that's it. Let's get rolling. Alison, it's lovely to see you. Thank you for coming on Platemark.
Well, thank you for asking me. This is very exciting for me.
It's exciting for us, too, because you are our very first paper conservator to join us on the pod. And I know that I won't ask all the questions people have, but I'm going to try.
Okay. I'll be sure to answer the unasked ones as well.
Unasked, right. Yeah. And so full disclosure, everybody, Alison and I have known each other since before we were born. Our parents were childhood friends. Crazy. Yeah. So we have known each other our entire lives. And in fact, Alison's mom was the first person I ever knew who was interested in art history and actually worked in a museum. And I was like, what is that? What's that? So that was like the first light bulb of mine was from your mom.
Oh,
yeah.
That's so cute.
Yeah, you can tell her.
Yeah, and that's great because, your father helped me discover what color my parachute was and figure out what career path to take. So here we are.
That's hilarious.
Products of our parents. So
my dad loves that book. Jesus.
Yeah. That was a good one.
Yeah. My father was a career counselor for a while, people, and he would drag you into his office and, put you through your paces, which was so painful. I thought the skills building exercise was so painful. What are you good at? I have no idea.
I know.
Yeah. Oh.
I like looking at things.
Exactly.
So that worked out.
All right. So why don't you introduce yourself for our listeners?
I'm Alison Luxner. I am a paper conservator at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, where I have been working for, depending on how you count it, either 16 or 19 years. I work on the museum's collection of prints, drawings, and photographs, watercolors, anything that involves paper. So that can be sculpture, it can be prints, it can be whatever you can think of.
Do you have to do the books too?
Well, as much as I can. I didn't do any training in book structures or book binding, but when it comes to taking care of what's bound in the book, then I do work on books. And I work on books also in terms of making supports for them for exhibitions within the museum. But as soon as there's a binding need that has to happen, we don't have book conservators on staff here at the MFA. So that becomes an outside job. We get a contractor to help us out with that. The other thing I should say is here at this museum, which is different from other museums, we have two different paper conservation labs. And one of them deals with traditional Asian materials, so woodblock prints and Persian manuscripts and that sort of thing. That's unusual. Most museums, the paper lab and every place else I've ever worked, we deal with every culture, every time period.
That probably has to do with the fact that you guys have a gigantic Asian art collection on paper.
Yeah, it is. The MFA has the largest collection of Japanese art outside of Japan. It's actually the split in the labs is actually a funny artifact of the history of the museum, in that when conservators first started here, we were adjunct to the curatorial departments. So the print and drawing department had a conservator, the Asian department had a conservator, the ancient, Greek and Roman sculpture had their own conservator, and it's only in recent decades that we've been sort of combined into our own conservation department. And there's a lot of us here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hangovers from past structures hanging around museums.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, so when did you figure out you were interested in art and specifically conservation?
Like you, I spoke to my mother and learned about museums through her. I always loved art. I didn't do a whole lot of studio art myself. I always liked to, but I realized pretty early on that I'm good at technique and my hand skills are good, but I'm not particularly creative. And so anytime I would try and make my own art, it was, I didn't even like it. So, um, and when I was in college, art history just seemed like a natural thing for me to do. I loved it. But my third year in college, I was very lucky and I got to spend the year in Paris. And my classes were taught in the museums, so that you were actually standing in front of, like I had a class on Rodin that was taught at the Musée Rodin, and we would just be there. And I realized that I just was not being satisfied with art history. I went to Mount Holyoke College, which is a small women's college in western central Massachusetts, and there's not a whole lot there in terms of museums and things to look at. And to go back there after being in Paris and realizing that everything I was looking at and writing about, I was looking at books, reproductions in books. I was going to the slide library, remember slide libraries? And
Yeah.
I was looking at, all the slides which have sort of turned red because they've been in the slide library for a really long time. And the film that they use for slides is pretty crummy and it would, turn red. So, and you never had a sense of scale, all that kind of thing. So by my senior year in college, I was like, yeah, this is not really what I want to be doing. I should have been a geologist, but it was kind of too late at that point. But I liked science. So after college, I worked in a frame shop in Cambridge, here, Boston, Cambridge, not England. And so I was doing picture framing for a few years, and that gets pretty boring pretty quickly, too. You're just sort of gluing together 90-degree angles and cutting mats. And, so I was sort of floundering around after college. That's probably about the time I went to see your dad. We went out for lunch and read the book and did all the exercises. And, I'm sure he didn't know what to do with me either. So my mother, working in an art museum, she knew about conservation. And in one of the programs that she was involved in early on, probably when we were in elementary or junior high, I'm guessing. I'm a little older than you, but we're roughly the same age. She worked for a weekend kids program at the Metropolitan Museum, and we would go in there and we would go around. We do all these fun programs and stuff. But some of the programs, they actually had the conservators come in and talk to us. So conservation was something I knew about. And when I started to look into it, at first I was convinced that this wasn't going to work out, because it turns out that in the United States there are essentially 3 graduate programs for conservation, and they each take 10 or fewer people a year. And I just thought, how are you supposed to get into one of these programs? And
what are the 3?
NYU, through the Fine Arts.
The Institute of Fine Arts?
The Institute of Fine Arts. They have a 4-year thing where you basically do the art history thing, and then you have a 4th year, and you get a certificate of conservation of art. There is SUNY at Buffalo, which has a 3-year art conservation program, and then there is the University of Delaware program, which is based at the Winterthur House and Garden Museum, and which is the one I ended up going to ultimately. So back in those days, which is a long time ago now, they had very strict requirements in terms of the kind of classroom work that you had to have, and you also had to have experience doing conservation. To even apply, I actually had to go back to school and take evening classes or weekend classes in chemistry. I needed 4 semesters of chemistry, general chemistry, organic chemistry, which as an art history major, I had, my science requirements were done with geology and astronomy.
Me too.
And I also needed to go back and get some of my studio art requirements. They wanted you to have studio art classes in basically all different media. So I had done a fair amount of drawing and pottery, but I needed to go back for painting and some printmaking. Fortunately, my art history I had enough art history. So once I got all that stuff together, which took a few years, I was still looking around to try and find a place to get the conservation experience part. And, it's really nice. Nowadays, I think the MFA and I think a lot of other institutions are really making a strong effort to try and make these careers that we have more inclusive. And so if, I found conservation work to do, but it was volunteer. So I had to support myself other ways. So, I was working in the evenings, but I also, had some parental help there in terms of, paying the rent, which nowadays you find more and more that those internship positions are paid. And I think that's just so important, so that, yikes, it's still, especially in a city like Boston, it's not exactly a living wage, because this is one of the most expensive cities to pay for housing. That's a whole other subject. At this point, I was living in Portland, Maine, and so I introduced myself, because I did a lot of cold calling and letter writing in those days. That was before email and stuff. You just had to pick up the phone and call people, which was really scary. I don't know if you remember that, but it was really scary.
It was terrifying.
Hi,
Yeah.
my name is, and they could just say whatever. But there was one woman named Judy Walsh who was in private practice in Maine at the time, and she was also working part of the time at the Worcester Art Museum in Massachusetts. And she had just, as it turned out, had just gotten a grant to have somebody cut mats at the museum. And of course, I had all that mat cutting experience from my years picture framing. So I ended up coming to Worcester to work in the mat cutting job, and then I would volunteer with the conservators. And sort of my weeks went that way, with like 15 to 20 hours cutting mats, volunteering, and then, oh my God, the crazy odd jobs I did in the evenings to supplement that. And then I was very fortunate in that that summer I ended up getting a full-time job as a technician out at the Williamstown, Massachusetts conservation studio, where I went and worked with a woman named Leslie Paisley, who was great. And it's a regional lab is an interesting thing, and I think a lot of people don't really understand what it is. But if you think about art museums or private collectors or historical societies with collections, but maybe not huge collections, they don't have the ability to have a conservation staff. And so a lot of them kind of join a regional center, regional lab. And there's one in Williamstown that was founded, I'm not sure when, but I think back in the 70s, not sure when exactly. And they have member institutions, also private individuals can go there as well. And they work for places such as, the museum at Dartmouth College, to the Historical Society in, Putney, Vermont, to the Sterling and Francine Clark Art Museum in Williamstown. And they're not for profit. On the other hand, they need to make money to support themselves. So the conservators are all required to, like a law firm, bill a certain number of hours per week or per day. So there's a lot of work coming through. And if you're trying to learn how to be a conservator, it's an amazing place because they have everything from Winslow Homer watercolors to, grandma's sketch from when she was in art school to, you name it, seed packets from some historical society, and just a huge range of stuff, and with a huge range of problems, big things, small things, giant wall maps, the kind that roll up on rollers that you pull down, to, postage stamps. So I was really lucky. I got to work there for a year before I went to graduate school.
Yep, the Williamstown Art Conservation Lab thing is on the campus of the Clark Art Institute, which is where the Williams College Art History Master's program is. And so we took a class at the lab, I remember distinctly. And I remember there was a giant abstract expressionist painting by, I can't remember who, that had about 1.5 feet of grime all the way along the bottom edge, about 10 feet of grime. And the conservator, whose name I've forgotten,
Probably Tom Branchick.
Yes, yeah. It was Tom Branchick. Thank you.
Yep.
It was because the dog liked to itch up against the impasto that this painting had become so dirty.
People live with art. Art's not always just in museums.
That's
People
right.
live with it, and they have dogs. And they have kids who, that's what happens. I mean, it looks like you have a nice print framed nicely on your wall behind you, and it looks like it's probably well cared for. But I got to tell you, some of the stuff hanging in my house could use a little more TLC.
I mean, it's money, costs money.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So anyway, that's pretty funny. Yeah, that's pretty funny. So I went to graduate school, which is still at the University of Delaware Winter program and at the Buffalo program, is a 3-year program where you do 2 years of on-site classroom work with your teachers. And then you have a 3rd year where you do a 3rd-year internship in your place somewhere. And the summer after your 1st year and the summer after your 2nd year, you typically have a 2-month internship somewhere. I knew by that point that I wanted to do conservation of works on paper. I had originally thought that I wanted to do conservation of antiquities, particularly Greek pots and sculpture. And I had this image that I would be the conservator that took care of the stuff that they pulled up from shipwrecks in the Aegean and in the Mediterranean. And I had this very clear image of myself in a studio on a cliff over some sparkly water somewhere. So at one point during my time when I was at Worcester, they gave me some money and I went to London and took a course, like a week-long course at the Institute of Archaeology on the conservation of Greek pots. And I could not get that pot back together to save my life.
Oh!
It was like trying to get all these pieces together. And it was like, I think at that moment, I suddenly realized that, I had been working all the jobs I'd had up until then, which were the picture framing. I worked for a while in a print shop making halftones and running duplicator offset litho presses, and works on like paper was something I really understood, and works on paper was something I really understood, and trying to get that piece of pot back in. And I also realized at the time that what I really liked about Greek pots were that they're very much like drawings. The little sketches on them, the little black figure, red figure, later things, they're basically drawings, right? So that was why I like them. So I came back from that course thinking, okay, well, so I got to literature and just really was able to focus. I was really lucky. I had some great classmates. We all supported each other. As it turned out, I was the only paper conservation major in my class, so I got a lot of attention from my teachers, which was nice. And I had a couple of great summer internships, one in your fair city, Baltimore, at the Baltimore Museum of Art, and a long time, it was way before you got there. I wonder where you were. Maybe you were in Washington.
I must have been in DC, yeah.
My second summer I spent in New Orleans, which was a hoot. Nice northeastern girl like me ended up in the South. It was great. I loved it. And then my third year, I went out to San Francisco and I worked at the Legion of Honor. So the Fine Arts Museums, plural, has two museums. For those of you who don't know, there's the Palace of the Legion of Honor, and then there's the museum in Golden Gate Park called the D. Young. The works on paper collection is focused mainly at the Legion. And the year that I was there, which would have been 92 to 93, there were a couple of years there where they shut the Legion down, moved everybody out because they were doing some mitigation for earthquake vulnerabilities of the building. If you think the big earthquake in San Francisco was 87 or 88, so that was sort of still ramifications from that. So the Achenbach Foundation, which is the main part of the works on paper collection at the Fine Arts Museums, moved into the basement floors of the Crown Point Press.
What?
Yeah. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So they were located there for a couple of years.
Oh my gosh.
Which was completely and totally awesome. So for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
One, it meant I could live with friends in the Mission and get to work easily because it was right there south of Market. I didn't have to go way the heck out. Then it was great. We could, see what the printers were working on and interact with them. They had a fabulous kitchen lunch area. They were the first workplace I had ever seen that had a ping pong table. I know that's, de rigueur now, but at the time that was really something.
Was the whole setup in the basement of Crown Point Press, was that set up for visitors? Was it a print room off campus, or was it like storage and let's get some things done while we're here?
They were doing a big project, one of the earlier projects that I knew, because this was 92 to 93 academic year, of doing a lot of digitization of the collection. And so they had a whole slew of volunteers who were going through the print collection. I'm not sure if they were doing drawings too, but definitely the prints, where they were putting in sort of keywords, searchable words for whatever it was. So, if the print had a horse and a shield and a carriage and a lady, all that sort of stuff would go in there. And they were also very innovative in using barcodes for locations. That was, I think, if not the first, one of the very first places to try and do that. So we all had to use these scanners whenever we were moving things everywhere. So that whole project was going on. And so those people were there. And a couple of the curators were there. And then the paper conservation studio was there. And then we would periodically run out to the De Young if we were doing exhibitions there or something like that. But basically, all those functions were going on in the basement of Crown Point Press, which was very cool.
That is cool. Before you move on to the next step, talk to me about this debated the barcode thing
Oh,
for
yeah.
so long, and how'd it go?
To be honest, I think there's still using, I mean, so much, it was an enormous amount of work to get it up and running. And I think once that enormous amount of work was done, I think people kind of liked it. It's a funny thing. I make a living by working with my hands. I had a very difficult time with that scanner thing. I could not get the motion right for it to actually scan the barcode. I mean, it was weird. It was like
Huh.
this like Luddite thing.
But you had to put the barcode sticker on the mat, right? So
Yeah, you had to put it on the mat
what
or
if
on
you
the
don't
frame.
have things in mats, like the
Well,
BM?
exactly. Then you
Right.
put it on a folder, but then is it a pressure sensitive sticker that's going to fall off? Yeah, there were a lot of issues. Bob Futernick, who was the head of the lab then and in the upper admin of the Fine Arts Museums, I think it was really his brainchild, and he was going to make it work. And honestly, I should ask somebody who's there now if they still find it helpful. I mean, yes, I think we've talked about it here too. I mean, we've got 250,000 plus works on paper. I just can't even imagine how. I think it's fine for a small collection where you can put a sticker on something, but for a big print collection, it's just super ambitious.
Yeah, I do wonder if people are all right, listeners, if you work in a museum, write into us and let us know.
Yeah, exactly. How are those
How's that scanning going?
30-year-old stickers doing? Are they still
Exactly.
stuck or have they fallen off?
Yeah, and then they're floating around in the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All of that.
yeah, nightmare.
Not that any system is perfect. I mean, that's why we get audited every year is they come in and they want to make sure that they can find things.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because I was always in the audit, always wherever I worked,
Yeah.
and I think people don't the inventories. You had to pull out every box and look at every last thing and read off the
Mm-hmm.
numbers, and it took weeks and weeks and weeks,
Oh,
weeks and
yeah.
weeks. But it was important. Like when
It's
things went
important.
missing, it was so easy to kind of grab two things and stick them in a box when the bottom thing shouldn't have gone in. That happened to me once. It was terrifying when we finally.
Well, it's happened to all of us,
Yeah.
and things get. It's a lot of pieces of paper, and how do they not get? Anyway, it's
Yeah.
yeah. You should get a registrar
Oh, yeah. You're
on
right.
your
I haven't talked to one of
podcast.
those yet.
Ooh, there's a tough job for you.
Yeah, no kidding. Whew.
I know, and they don't even get to sit in the room with the art. They're like, so it's a hard one. Um, anyway, then I was back at Williamstown for the second time. I worked there for a year on a fellowship.
There are a lot of fellowships. I don't know if that's still true, but it seemed like there's
Yeah,
always people on fellowships places in
well, it's
conservation.
how museums get, you can get funding from Mellon or Getty or private donors to pay a lower salary for a couple of years. We have a fellowship here. Actually, I don't know if you've seen somebody walking around behind me, but that's our current fellow, Fenna and Galki. And it's great. I mean, we love it because we get people in who are, I mean, at this point, I've been out of school for decades, and it's great to have these recent graduates come in. So we have it's specifically a postgraduate fellowship. So they've been through all their schooling. They come in for 2 years and they're able to keep us up to date with what's going on out there, what are new techniques, what are people thinking now. We learn we learn a lot from them. They learn a lot from us. It's a moment to transition from being a student to being a full-time worker somewhere. It gives people a sense of what it's like to work in an art museum, which actually reminds me, I want to back up a little bit and talk about where conservators end up
Good
in their
question.
jobs, because I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones. I ended up being able to get a full-time job in a city where I wanted to live. Art conservation is not the kind of job that you can move somewhere and look for a job. You have to move to where the job is. I think it's the same for curators, unless you really want to run your own business, and a lot of people do. So that's where you have what we call private conservators. So those are people who are a little more comfortable living with risk. They don't have a steady paycheck. They don't maybe have health insurance, depending what their family situation is. On the other hand, it gives you incredible freedom. And I know people who've gone into the field specifically because they want to run their own business. They want to work for themselves. They see conservation as a way of being able to do that. And it is very true. You can do that. I will say, do not go into paper conservation if that's what you want to do, because that's not where the money is. People don't want to spend any money on having you fix their prints and drawings. They will not even blink to spend several $1,000s to have you do something to a painting. But that's a whole other topic, the hierarchy of art.
The false hierarchy.
Yeah. But whereas you can take a painting in and work on it for a year and not really work on anything else. Works on paper, each treatment, some are longer than others, but generally they're much quicker. I mean, I'm working on a backing removal right now that's just been taking me forever. It's a watercolor about yay big, and it's scrape, scrape, scrape. But it's an early Mondrian, so that's pretty great, right?
Nice.
Because I don't get to look at it because it's lying face down. I'm like working on the back.
But that's something that people probably don't know, that, when gifts come in or even purchases, many times they haven't been taken out of their frames in years and years and years. And suddenly there you are with this mess.
Yes, that happens a lot. And in fact, this Mondrian, we were given a gift this past year of a number of early Mondrian watercolors and drawings. Pretty great. But yeah, they're all, some are in better shape than others. A lot have been proudly hung on someone's wall for 50, 70 years and are, faded or stained, and some are much more fresh and quite beautiful. But anyway, to get back to, so you can be a conservator in private practice. You can be a conservator in an art museum or a historical society or, natural history museum, depending on what your specialty is. And there's the regional labs, which we've also spoken about. And then within the field of conservation, there are many specialties. So I chose to focus on works of art on paper, and I have a sort of, a minor in photographic materials. Some paper conservators like to have a minor in either skins, parchment, vellum, manuscript types of things, or books. They might go that direction. But the main fields are paintings, specifically easel oil paintings, but people also work on murals and large-scale things. Objects, which can include everything from ancient sculpture to, the stuffed animals at a natural history museum to anything that you can think of that's three-dimensional. And that's kind of a fun, interesting field, because every single thing they work on is different from the last thing that they worked on. So, and some people do specialize within the field of objects to say inorganic materials, in other words, glass and stone and metal, versus organic materials, which would be feathers and straw and chocolate, if you're talking about Joseph Beuys or somebody. Then you have textile conservators,
right,
who can be anywhere from costume, fashion stuff to medieval tapestries and everything in between. Wooden artifacts, furniture, so anything that's made out of wood that's put together and joined. So it can also include frames. We're lucky that we have both here at the MFA. We have a frame conservator as part of the furniture conservation department. Oh, Asian format. So here, again, we're so lucky. We have Chinese painting conservators and Japanese painting conservation department, because they're very, very different. We could also use Korean, but we don't have that. So screens, scrolls, those kinds of things. And scientific research. People go into the science of conservation. So they're the ones that do the analytical testing and run the instruments that do various analytical techniques for us.
When I was at the National Gallery back in the old days,
Back in the olden days.
in the 90s,
Yeah.
there was a conservator on staff. They had a huge department. They had a conservator on staff, Merv, who was fantastic. And he was doing research into foam and packing materials, which were revolutionary. His studies were.
Yep. He's still the gold star of, in fact, right now is the annual meeting of the American Institute for Conservation. So a lot of conservators are out in Salt Lake City right now. And they did a pre-conference session on art in transit because all of us are lending more and more and more. And Merv, Merv, I think, was the one lecture where everybody's like, oh,
Yeah, right.
yeah, I mean, but how smart of the National Gallery. I mean, that's when I like knowing where my tax dollars are being spent. It's like, it's really important because we are sending stuff on the road all the time, all over the world. You want to share your collections, and that's part of the museum's mission statement and mandate. I mean, or sometimes gifts come with that tag on them. We have something here at the MFA called the Center for Netherlandish Art, and it was basically, yeah, who knew? It is based on a gift given by two local families who were collectors of Dutch and Flemish Netherlandish art. And part of their mission statement, for lack of a better word, is that a certain percentage of their collection is to be on view. So it's not just here at the MFA, but we travel a lot also. And there's a lot of artwork going around the world all the time. I mean, you can't drive down. I'm going down to Connecticut to see my mom this weekend. I can't drive from Boston down 84 towards New York without passing at least a couple of trucks that I know are carrying
oh, yeah, for sure.
artwork. And it's sort of like, do I know those drivers? Yeah. So thank heaven for the National Gallery to recognize that and have somebody like Merv who is trying to figure out, can you have too much foam? Yes, you can have too much foam. You have too much foam, things bounce too much. If you have just the right amount of foam, it actually holds things still while the plane lands or, goes through turbulence. We could use somebody like that here.
Yeah, I think he's retired now.
I think he is, but he's probably emeritus.
Oh, sure. I'm sure. Yeah, his he's married to Judith Brody, who I shared an office with for years.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's a small world, the museum world, Alison.
It is. It really is. Which is just so funny that we're both in it.
I know, and Judy Walsh was at the gallery when I was there too.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was my very first teacher.
That's what goes around.
She taught me one of the most important things when I left my first position with her. She gave me a phone book and some dimes, and she said, "This is the best thing I can ever teach you. Is when in doubt, call somebody."
Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
So I had like a list of phone numbers, and I had my dimes for the. Once again, back in the olden days, right?
Right.
When was the last time you used a payphone?
It's been a while.
It's been a while.
When things are okay to go out on loan, however many there are, how does the decision made to send a courier with or not to send a courier with?
That's an interesting question. Pre-pandemic, things were different. Post-pandemic, things changed. The two basic questions are how fragile or vulnerable is the piece of artwork that you're sending? The second main question is, where are you sending it and are they able to handle it? Both those questions are pretty subjective and people can argue about them. So, for example, if somebody wants to lend an old master print, they want to lend a couple of Rembrandts and a Schongauer and whatever. Those are not objects that are fraught with vulnerable parts. They are good quality ink on good quality paper. Chances are they are black ink on a cream colored paper. Sometimes you might have hand coloring in an old master print. Sometimes you might have an old master print on blue paper. Both those things would make something light sensitive, but those are pretty sturdy. And even though you and I might think of those works as incredibly valuable, when it comes down to comparing that with a $90 million Van Gogh painting, we lose. So,
damn it.
And actually, that's the other thing. Value comes into it too.
Right,
and that's sort of like, insurance. If those prints are going somewhere that we're familiar with, let's say they're going to the National Gallery, maybe we can say, all right, maybe a conservator does not have to go with those 3 prints that are going to the National Gallery where, we're friends with the conservators there, and we'll talk with them and they can look out for our stuff. Let's say they're going to a university gallery that none of us have ever been to. May be perfectly fine, but we don't know. Nobody's been there. That happens too. So,
the other thing that people may not know is that when you ask for a loan from somebody like the MFA, part of the package of information that you have to send in is the track record of your HVAC system.
absolutely.
And also what your security situation is. So some of
Yes.
these college and university galleries sometimes have less steady HVAC or no security or
Yep. All of that, or they have their security or students, it's a student job or something like that. Yes. So we need to look at that. We need to understand the layout of the galleries. If there are windows there, are things getting hit by natural light? How far away? Like, how is the object getting there? Are they just going on a truck? Do they have to fly? Is there an international border that you have to go through? So basically, then when the pandemic happened and we all had artwork scattered all around the world and nobody could travel, and we started doing our courier trips virtually with iPhones or iPads and sort of watching over things that way. And some institutions will now no longer send couriers, which is very frustrating to us all. So the Art Institute of Chicago is one of the most notorious ones. They will not pay for a courier to come, and they will not send a courier with their artwork. There's some slight wiggle room there, but not a whole lot. I think it's Tate Britain is a bit the same, is that way too. I mean, there are a number of them that now insist on just doing these things virtually.
so a registrar is walking around with their iPhone on picture flip and
yep.
wow.
So we've all done these virtual things now. And, frankly, sometimes it's fine. So let's say the university gallery that we lent some old master prints to, I went out to install. Everything was great, amazing staff, beautiful building. It was fantastic. So for the deinstall, I said, you know what, let's just do it virtually. I don't need to come all the way back out there because I've been there now and I know everybody involved and we can do it that way. But other times you're doing this virtual thing with people you don't know. You can't see anything. I mean, you can't look closely through one of these computer lenses,
No.
right?
Yeah, not really. So there's a lot of trust there, You have to trust.
Yeah, it is a lot about trust.
Yeah.
And it seemed like for a while we were going to stop, especially those of us in paper, like the paintings people, because of the value, they tend to do more of the courier trips. But I still seem to be doing a lot of courier trips, so that's fine. We have full exhibitions that we send on tour, and so 2 or 3 of us will go at a time to install a show or deinstall it. Or
What was your most memorable courier trip, for good or bad? It was Mary Souzer at the National Gallery had this story about taking a crate down the canals in Venice and having to, rig it up and over water.
Yeah, I've always wanted to do one of those.
Yeah, I know,
trips.
me too.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I mean, I've had, I always love it when you're flying somewhere and what you're bringing is too big to fit in a passenger plane, so you have to go cargo. And I think that's a lot of fun because often it's just like you and the crew, and they'll let you sit up front in a little jump seat and like look out the window during takeoff and landing. And I'm a very nervous flyer. I get like really, but I realized at one point that it's because on a passenger plane, you can only look out this little window to the side. You can't see where you're going. If I'm actually in the cockpit, it's fine. I can see where we're going.
Right.
So that's sort of fun. Although those can be really long. I had a trip coming back from Japan once where it was on a cargo flight, and we flew from Tokyo to Anchorage, Alaska, and then from Anchorage to Atlanta, Georgia, and then finally from Atlanta to JFK, and then I had to truck from JFK to Connecticut, where I was working at the Yale Center for British Art at the time.
Oh my God.
And it was a good 36 hours. And this particular cargo plane was a 747, but it had never been outfitted as a passenger plane. And there were no windows except for the cockpit. So it was, you know, it was pretty long and grim and so on. But I can at least say that I've now been to, it's the only time I've ever been to Alaska was getting off the airplane there. I think one of my favorite was a trip I did here for the MFA. We were getting ready for an exhibition called Degas and the Nude. And I was sent to Switzerland to pick up a few paintings and some pastels. And these were all privately owned. And so I spent, I think it was 3 days in the end, driving all around Switzerland. I mean, Switzerland's not huge, but still, it's a funny country because it's 2 different languages. And sometimes you stop at a rest stop and you don't know which language you're supposed to use. But we were going up to like where all the rich people live up in the mountains and stuff to go to their full chateaus up there and their, getting their amazing, it was just really fun. It's fun when you go to these collectors' houses and you pack up their stuff. And I just remember like driving around. I was in this van with these 3 guys that were the art handler, packer, driver, whatever. And I was sort of squashed on the back seat on the passenger side and like whizzing around these little turns on these mountains where I'm looking down, to the tiny glacial river way at the very bottom and thinking about the millions of dollars worth of art that's just like in the back seat. And then we would stop and look at these vistas of mountains and eat amazing cheese. That was a really fun trip.
I remember when I first started doing them, when I was a young pup, that there was discussion and often happened that the drivers would smoke.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Which they don't really do anymore, I don't think.
Well, yeah. No, well, it's different now. I mean, I do remember an early trip I had in France with these guys just smoking their gauloises. But I'd say within the past, well, it was pre-pandemic, but not much before that. So maybe 6 years ago, coming up from the National Gallery with a guy who was vaping the whole time.
Oh, gosh.
Some revolting mango scented, And you don't want to get into an argument with these guys.
No.
You just kind of have to let them do what they do and then complain about it later to your registrar.
Right.
But it was just, I think he thought I wouldn't know. I think people who vape think that you don't notice. So anyway, but you do. Those of you who vape.
Right. It's gross. Do you consider yourself to have a specialty within paper? Like Tom Primo loves to work on Matisse prints, for instance. He's fascinated by them, and that's kind of his subset, Do you have one of those?
Yeah. I don't. I find that I kind of fall in love with whatever I'm working on at the time. If I had to choose, like I remember once applying for a job at the Museum of Modern Art, and I was terrified I would get the job because I wasn't sure I could live without the older stuff,
Mm-hmm.
But if MoMA offered you a job, you can't say no. But fortunately, I did not get that job. So, one of the things I love about our collection here is it's anything and everything. So I gravitate more towards the old master prints in particular, Northern European in particular.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just what I like. Right. And I also really love some of the contemporary stuff where you can't figure out how it's made. So a lot of what we do in conservation, besides fixing things and telling people what they can and can't do with the artwork, is try to figure out the materials and techniques that were used, which is really fun. I'm working on an Andre Raz print right now.
Oh, I love him.
So, yeah, I figured you probably would with your Atelier 17 stuff.
Yeah.
And Shevitz, how did he? Yeah. So, and the print came up to me because it's extremely wrinkled.
Wrinkled?
Because he used a number of different plates, and there's like this very deep embossing. Wow. And so within the plate mark, it's like,
oh, wow.
And they're horizontal ripples, which means that when it's hanging on the wall in a gallery with the lights coming from above, you really see those ripples. If you could light it from the side, they would pretty much vanish. The margins are perfectly planar. It's just because it's so stretched out within the plate.
Wow.
And it came up and I was like, oh, I can't do anything about that. I can't stretch out the mark. There's really nothing I could do. So I mended some tears in the edge and then spent about an hour trying to figure out how on earth, he's got soft ground, he's got like this embossing, that is so deep. It's like, did he cut holes in the voids in the plate so that
That's a scorper, probably.
yeah.
Sorry. You should have called me.
I should have called you. Well, I still have it in the lab, but it's pretty cool. Yeah, and it's going up. Yeah, if you ever find your way up here, I don't know when you were last in Massachusetts. Probably a long time ago.
It's been a while,
but,
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that's one of the things I really love to do is to try and figure out how something was made. The other reason I like working for somebody else and not myself is that they do fund me every few years to do some professional development. And this fall, I'm going to France to go take a workshop on making blue paper in the traditional way. We're going to dye some fibers with indigo, and then we're going to mash up those fibers and make paper, and it's all going to be in a 17th century mill, in the mountains with fresh water for the, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
I'm like totally geeking out if you can't see me.
Oh, yeah. No, it's like, it's going to be amazing.
That sounds awesome.
I can't wait for my fingernails to all turn blue. No. To answer the original question, I don't really specialize in anything. So there are three of us and a fellow in the paper lab here. So Annette Manick is the head of the lab, and then I'm here, and Katrina Newberry, she and I are we're like the twins. Annette, as lab head, has made a point of not having us specialize. She wants all of us to be able to pretty much deal with anything that comes along, which is great. I mean, I know in other labs, like our paintings lab, for instance, people are either American or they're European or they're
20th century or earlier.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't really specialize. So the way we work, it's very much a collaboration with our curators. If I have something that needs to be treated, so for example, right now we're prepping for a small exhibition of an artist named Edwin Holgate, a Canadian who was the 8th member of the group of 7, if that makes sense. He was a painter, but also a printmaker, and he did a lot of wonderful woodcuts, just black on cream paper, a couple of color, but mostly they're just black and white woodcuts. And we were given a gift recently of 80 maybe or so of these prints, which is unusual for a non-Canadian institution to have these. And nobody outside of Canada has any of his paintings. So I don't know if you're familiar with Emily Carr. She was the Canadian artist most known for doing a lot of images of Indigenous communities and totem poles and landscapes. And he does a little bit of that as well. So he's got some of that, but he also focused on kind of Quebecois life. So he has fishermen and farmers and men sharpening axes and women doing stuff in the garden, and they're really sweet and nice. For that exhibition, Edward Saywell, who's head of our prints and drawings department, the gift came in. A lot of these things really needed a lot of work. So what I would do would be to examine them, determine what needs treatment, because it's going to get worse if I don't do something about it. What would look better with treatment? So it's a cosmetic thing, but gosh, if I could wash that print, wouldn't that be really nice? And then Edward and I would sit down, and I actually would write out written proposals, which he actually, because we're old-fashioned here, signs off on to show that we agree about what I'm doing. And as a conservator, you want that because it's somebody else who's taking responsibility, because any conservation treatment is a risk and something can happen. You put a print in water to wash the paper and brighten it up, and you run the risk that some of that ink is actually watercolor that somebody put on there because it didn't print right, and suddenly you have a whole huge mess on your hands. But you have a curator who shares that responsibility with you.
But I'm going to interject here 1 second, because this came up in probably more than one place that I worked, where the conservators fell under the curatorial umbrella structurally, and so the chief curator could basically bully the conservator into doing more than they should or
Mhm.
is safe or whatever, like washing.
I can guess where that happened.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and so the independence of the
yeah.
conservators is very important.
I mean, our curators here are very respectful. Cliff Ackley, who was the head of the print department for half a century, he was very respectful, and he was also very restrained. He wasn't one for doing a lot of heavy-handed conservation. The curators we have now, it's a little different. We do a little bit more. But I have been in positions where I've had a curator, not here, say, "Oh, come on, Allison, you can get rid of that stain," and I'm like, "Yeah, I can get rid of that stain if I pour bleach all over it, but you know what? That stain's just going to come back even worse in another 15 years. And this print's going up on the wall for a 6-month, exhibition. Why do we want to do that to it? It's like, looks fine with a stain. Paper gets stains, you know. So you can have the pushy curators who want something that you're not willing to do. And I've also proposed things where it's like, I think that I should do this. I think that this print would look a lot better if I filled in this hole, took out this old repair, which is ugly, covered this thing up, and the curator is not having it. They're like, no,
Oh, funny.
no, I don't want you to do that.
Huh.
So, but it is good when they push you a little. I mean, I've had a couple of treatments here, particularly of posters, where I mean, posters
They're terrifying.
they're terrifying.
They are. Oh,
So I had a Jules Charest poster that I was getting ready for a Toulouse-Lautrec exhibition we had, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, and it was, as often is the case, posters are often mounted with a linen backing. And what happens is over time, the linen reacts and the paper reacts to moisture in different ways. So you set up this like crazy thing that's going on. And, 100 years later, you've got unbearable wrinkles and tears. And you add to that the fact that posters were meant to be somewhat ephemeral, and they're basically made on cheap industrial quality paper where the paper fibers are so short that it's basically like they're not even really fibers, they're just bits. It's like, ground up wood pulp instead of like nice long linen fibers. So, how to get this linen off the back, and the linen is, 100 times stronger than the paper. And then wash it and then put it all back together. And it's sort of one of those things where I was like, I don't know. And then the curator was like, well, it'd be really great if we could use this. We can't use it the way it looks. So fortunately, I had the backing of it's nice. I love working here because there are other paper conservators in my lab with me. And so when you're racked with insecurity and all that, there are other people to help you out. When I worked at the Worcester Museum, it was just me, and I was just sometimes just, well, that's when Judy Walsh with the phone numbers to call thing.
yeah, right.
And it's like, oh. And when I left there, I thought, I'm never working by myself again. It was just way too stressful.
Oh. What do you recommend instead of the linen? Are you doing like Japanese tissue or something?
Yeah, so we did Japanese tissue.
Okay.
So ultimately, at that treatment, I got the linen off. We washed it,
Yikes.
and then lined it with a new lining of very lightweight Japanese paper. Dried it, stretched it so it's nice and smooth and flat, and actually it looks great. But it was really scary, and but kind of fun and liberating at the same time too. It's like, wow, it's big and it's color and it's yeah, that was kind of fun.
I've met conservators in my life who had an attitude like I'm all that in a bag of chips. And when you think about the kind of information that you have to have in your head, in addition to the art history, all of that science, like I could never make it through organic chem. Kudos to you. But also you have to have the hands.
Yeah. It's a mix.
Yeah, it's a real mixed bag.
Yeah. Which was great for somebody like me. I mean, I always said that, I have a kind of a short attention span, so it's good to have all these different facets of my job that I have to do. And the other thing is too, chemistry is not as hard as people say that it is. It's, I mean, if you cook you can do chemistry.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
All right.
or at least at the undergraduate level to get through your undergraduate requirements. It's cooking.
I mean,
And if you look at it that way, it's
yeah,
like, okay, and it's a lot of memorization. Well, you know what? You don't get through art history without being able to memorize things. So
that is true. But like even my chemistry friends were like, organic chem almost killed me. I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going there. Jesus.
I just think that that's a myth that they all promote to make them feel smarter than art history majors. Art history was really hard. I mean, there was so much there. You had to have history, you had to have understand artists and media, and you had to understand sponsorship and politics and
Religion. Yeah.
religion.
Yeah.
You had to understand, what was easy to do and what was hard to do, and who came first or later, and it's
Yeah.
very complicated.
And then you got all the techniques in printmaking.
And then you got all the techniques in printmaking, which,
That's why we think we're superior, because we got all that too.
we have all that too. We do. We have all that too. So, I mean, printmaking is amazing. It's yeah. I haven't done much printmaking, and I haven't for a long time. But I did a fair amount of woodcut and intaglio. Well, etching. I never did engraving. Etching and aquatint. I never did litho, but I married a man who went through the Tamarind program. So if I ever have litho questions,
Wow, nice.
my husband Craig Keller did that. So he's not printing anymore either, but it's we've got a nice roller downstairs in the cellar somewhere.
Nice.
But it's been fun listening to some of the people you've had on your podcast, and sort of, it's so interesting to hear people use words to explain something that's so physical and visual. I mean, printmaking is really physical stuff. So,
Yeah.
I need you to come look at this Raz and tell me how to.
I mean, yeah. Well, I'll take a look. Send me a picture.
Okay, well.
I mean, I've never made an etching myself. Like I printed them, but I haven't ever tried to create one myself. So, but I have resources.
Yeah.
I have peoples.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
It's a great field. I don't advise anybody to go into it though. Like any art job in the arts, it just doesn't pay you enough to stop working before you're 90. But I don't mind. I'm a worker bee. I never wanted to be a lab head. I like staying in the background and doing my thing. We do a lot of public programming and stuff. So a lot of conservation work is not exactly teaching. We don't teach. We're not trying to teach people how to be conservators, but we're teaching them about materials and techniques. So, it can be really fun to have a group. Like one of my colleagues had a group of teenagers come in and they made paper, and it's just such a good way to have people understand, the I hate this word materiality, but it's important. I mean, I knew that concept a long time before people started using that word, so I guess I have to embrace the word because it does work. But it's I mean, especially in art history, boy, some of those. The popularity of different phrases and how that comes and goes. It's like, oh, please. Yeah.
I'm all for simplifying international art speak.
Yeah, no, I like that. You've always struck me as a very straightforward kind of art curator type.
Right. Where do you stand on white gloves?
Oh, that's a good question. So in our print room here, when people come and visit, they come in and we have a sink and we have people wash their hands. And we don't require gloves. I don't love gloves. I find for myself wearing them, I rely so much on the sense of touch and handle so much paper by now. I can tell by handling a piece of paper how to handle it, if it's brittle or not. I think if people's hands are clean, the exception to that are photographic materials, because they are metal. So if you have a silver gelatin print, it's basically silver metal, which can tarnish from a fingerprint. And I've seen, thumbprints, tarnished thumbprints in photographs, it's a good idea to wear gloves with that. But I think that the chance of having your glove catch on something and tearing it is, you know, on the other hand, if you don't have a sink and you can't wash your hands, then by all means put gloves on, but clean gloves, and don't, like, the gloves are protecting your hands, but the gloves can still get dirty and transfer that dirt to the artwork. So, I mean, we learned a lot about that during COVID, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
like, don't put your mask here, and
Yeah.
don't, all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So,
Then sort of what's your elevator speech on how people at home who don't have any handling experience, like what are the rules of home handling?
wash your hands, have a space prepared. So if you're working like I would be working at my dining room table, clear it off of everything and make sure it's not wet, and have some good light, and really pay attention. If actually a good one of the things I see people do is they're showing me something and they can't help but point and touch what they're trying to show me with their fingers. Like, there's a stain here or there's a tear here. It's like, don't do that. And, if possible, keep your things. I mean, works on paper, things fade, even, things fade. So if you don't have to have it hanging up, put it in the dark. If you are displaying artwork in your house, don't put it right across from a window. Pull the shades if you're going on vacation for 3 weeks and nobody's going to look at it anyway. I know somebody who collects Japanese prints, and he has this sweet way of hanging. He buys like cheap antique kimonos at the, flea markets in Tokyo, and he hangs the kimonos over the prints on the wall to protect them from light, which is, I think, kind of cute. You're sacrificing the kimono.
I was just going to say.
Yeah, but he's made that decision.
Yeah.
Please don't hang things in bathrooms because they just get steamed up and moldy and gross. If you're going to hang something in a bathroom, don't have it be a work of art on paper or anything, really.
I was going to say, can paintings handle the moisture?
No, they can't. No, they can't either. Yeah. Outside walls are hard.
Radiators.
In the winter, where we live, things get super, super dry in the winter. And then in the summer, you've got 90% humidity. If you don't have central air conditioning, your house is going to be really humid. You just have to take all these kinds of things into consideration. But, artwork it's something that everybody should live with and enjoy and have and like looking at. People ask me all the time about, well, should I get UV filtering glass? And I'm like, well, how long are you going to hang this up? Like, well, it's going to be there forever. If it's something that's going to be hanging on your wall for a really long time, UV glass is not going to really make that much of a difference. Light exposure is cumulative. So it's, and I'm the worst of it. I hang things up and they just stay there forever. I have a wonderful portfolio of Schongauer prints that are actually all from the 1930s in Berlin. They're all facsimiles, and they're gorgeous, So I hang those up and I just enjoy them, and I don't really worry about it. Okay, they're almost 100 years old, but they're not, 450 years old.
Right.
So, so I don't know. If you do have something hanging up and you realize you're not looking at it, nobody's looking at it, put it away, give the thing a rest.
All right. That's good advice. Thank you, Miss Conservator. We've hinted at all of these things. We say it all the time because it's best practice. But I think conservators lend a certain gravitas to the subject that I think is worthwhile.
Okay, Ms. Curator. Ms. Podcaster.
That's right.
Yeah, you're like Sarah Jessica Parker now, right? That's what she does. She runs a podcast now. And,
oh, she does?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
In the Sex and the City.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's her. She's a podcaster.
Oh, funny. I don't watch it. Yeah. I'm so afraid to say.
Oh, yeah, I don't really either, but I
didn't realize that.
On Facebook. Anyway.
Yeah, I think I've really seen a romanticization of a podcaster quite yet. It's a hamster wheel, people. That's it. You think you're ahead, and then you're not.
And then you're not. Well, it's very cool what you do.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think it's worthwhile, honestly. I mean, so I feel like it's a public service announcement, every time I do one. Break down the walls, pull back the curtain,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ta-da!
All right. Well, thank you for coming on Platemark, Allison. It was lovely chatting with you.
It was great. I
Yeah.
can't believe it was like I just looked at the clock and I'm like, "Wait a minute, we're done?" No.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it went by really fast. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
It
"Oh,
tends to do that.
yeah, it does."
Thank you for listening to this episode of Platemark with my guest, Alison Luxner. I hope you enjoyed her. I love talking to her. As you know, if you listened all the way through, we are childhood friends, family friends from way, way back. So we've known each other a long time. Usually in the outro credits, I take the opportunity to thank people who helped me make the podcast, but I also want to put in a plug for the Brooklyn Fine Art Print Fair, which is coming up next March in 2025 to coincide with the IFPDA Fair in New York City. Working on this incredible fair are several people, one of whom is my friend Luther Davis, who is the director of Powerhouse Arts Print Shop. And Powerhouse Arts, in fact, is hosting the print fair. It's their fair, and I'm helping them get it together. We are planning for 40 booths, 40 galleries and print publishers and print shops, and also a section for individual artists, university shops, and book arts people on tabletops. So it's going to be a big fair, and I hope you will make plans to come and see us. Okay, thank yous always to, well, first of all, to my guest, Alison, for being such a great guest. Thank you. One also to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. One to Dan Fury of Extension Audio for his help with sound and editing. And one also to Skip Barnhart and Lee Turner for their studio sounds at the top and bottom of the pod. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate those soundtracks. All right, I think that's it. We will see you next time.